Good afternoon, everyone. As stated, I'm Cuca Acosta. I'm the Associate Director for Undergraduate Admissions at the University of California, Santa Barbara campus. And today really is an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about the undocumented student going through the admissions process and also their ability to find support on college campuses. There was a lot of change that happened last week after President Obama spoke, so a few of the slides I'm going to make some corrections on just for your point of reference. So, to start off with, we're going to talk about four main items. The first, of course, is going to be talking about the Federal DREAM Act and sort of the big picture of immigration reform as it pertains to undergraduate students and graduate students. Second is a form of financial aid that students have found, and that's the DACA opportunities. DACA, which stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, allowing students to work legally on a college campus or within the community. And then we'll talk about the admissions process, and I'll use the example of the University of California admissions process so that students have a better grasp of how to go through it. And then finally, finding support services on a college campus for students who are looking at a college or university as this big foreign place where they're going to try to get an education. It can be very daunting to realize that I'm not just a new student in a very new environment, I'm also an undocumented student, so what that means to me. As we talk, please note that you're able to type in questions. I really encourage the questions, and we will leave time for questions at the end. So let's start on the big scale, shall we? And that is the Federal DREAM Act. Now, there have been quite a few iterations of the Federal DREAM Act, and oftentimes this is one of those really big, hot political items. I have a lot of personal biases about Federal DREAM Act, so I'm going to give you the very unbiased facts. One, it was introduced as bipartisan legislation, and in theory, the first sets of Federal DREAM Acts that came through were talking about not just the ability for individuals to go into college and to get assistance, but also a path towards citizenship and immigration opportunities. Well, those have changed a lot, so at this point in time, the idea and the bills that are pushed forward about the Federal DREAM Act are hoping that students can qualify, undocumented students can qualify, who are eligible for a path towards citizenship. And one of the ways for that path towards citizenship to happen is if a student has a college degree. And so this, I have to make sure, is really clear. There is no actual Federal DREAM Act which has passed. These are all laws that have been proposed. Unfortunately, it hasn't been something that has been ironed out, but a lot of what has been coming out in the past few weeks with regards to immigration reform is a step towards this Federal DREAM Act, and the hope that every year when it's presented in some way, shape, or form, that it will have an agreement on both sides of the party. There are lots of details with the different acts, the different Federal DREAM Acts that have gone out, and one of the sources that I go to all the time to try to figure out what's new, what's going on, what's true, what's not, is dreamact.info. So www.dreamact.info. So I put that on the screen so that you can go into more detail about the current DREAM Act legislation that, again, has yet to pass, but that has college as a great option towards undocumented youth finding themselves in an illegal standing in the United States. Now, the Federal DREAM Act, as it was written and many iterations ago, did spark in 2012 an idea that, well, there might not necessarily be a path towards a student getting their immigration status cleared, but there could be a way to really help students who wanted to go into college and universities, and also to help the youth that are in our country who are here without their paperwork to sort of be active members of society. And so DACA, which stands again for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was announced in 2012 by the Department of Homeland Security, and at that point in time, Janet Napolitano. So it really was an opportunity for a certain subset of individuals who met X, Y, and Z criteria to find themselves as a low priority for deportation. And this was an opportunity for individuals to find themselves with a reprieve for 2 years. Now, last week, November 20th, President Obama exchanged the 2-year sentence for a 3-year now. So DACA is a valid 3-year opportunity for individuals to be on the university campus working, to be on a state campus working, to be just working, period. Because DACA allows for an individual to request essentially a social security number, and that then allows a work permit. That's just really general and giving you just an icing on the cake, so I apologize if it feels like it's not a lot of detail, but I'll give you the screenshot, which has a lot of detail, but I won't go into every bullet. So DACA isn't just, oh, well, great, you've been here for a while, let's just get you going. It's actually a very lengthy process, a very large application that is asking individuals who meet X, Y, and Z criteria. And the biggest one that has changed right now is that a student or a young individual who has been in the United States since June 15, 2010. 2010 is the new number, 2007 was the old number, that if they've been here for that period of time and they were here and they do not have legal status, that they could apply for that work permit. That work permit allows them to gain employment like any other individual who has a social security card. Like myself, who was born here, I go and I apply for a job, I fill out a social, I say here's my address, and I'm there and I'm qualified, I'm in an interview process. Well, students, young adults who meet the eligibility on the screen can now have that exact same opportunity. They fill out the exact same application that anyone else would. They complete the job that anyone else would. They now have a bankable income just like others. And that's a great option for students. When it comes to DACA, one of the really fun things for students is that they can walk into a building going, hey, I, of course, have an opportunity to work. I can support myself. I can do so legally. Now, DACA does allow for a few other perks, and let me show you those. Some of the perks that are exciting is that in about 45 states, DACA allows for an individual to also request a driver's license. How exciting is that? Knowing that you can drive legally, you can get from place A to place B. Beforehand, if you were an undocumented student, you were reliant on public transportation, and you were reliant on others to take you to point A to point B. And for a community college student, for example, if I had to get to my class and then I was trying to get across town to go home, take care of my siblings, you were reliant on a bus schedule that may or may not work within your class schedule. So now individuals in the states that you see on the box to the right are allowed to also request a driver's license. Now that's not an automatic. They still have to take the test and they have to go through all the fun DMV programs that everyone else does, but it's a great option for students now. What's also exciting is that, again, as I said, they now have a 3-year DACA option. So students will find themselves submitting their paperwork for DACA. If they are awarded the DACA paperwork, then that means that they're given the opportunity for 3 years to work, to have that driver's license. But at the end of those 3 years, they must reapply. The application process, as I said, is pretty lengthy and it is costly. There's biometrics, there's a day-by-day, month-by-month documentation that you've been in the United States continually. And for many of us, we don't think about things like that. Well, of course, I've been in the United States. That's not a big deal. Well, think about how do you prove it when you're an undocumented student? You typically did not have a job, so you didn't have pay stubs. You typically did not have summer school registration. Doesn't really exist for many of us if we're not doing summer school. So there's a lot of these things that were hard to prove, and that's why we saw that there were a large number of eligible DACA There were a large number of individuals who were eligible for DACA, over 100,000, that didn't apply for it when it first came out. And that was a really scary concept for many people to apply, not just because of the cost, but because there wasn't an idea that this was a permanent situation. We know that DACA benefits are here today, but we don't know that they'll be here 3 years from now. They'll change as politics changes. What is really clear for anyone who submits DACA paperwork is that it is not a residency nor a citizenship process. This is deferred action, which means that you are being placed on a low priority for deportation or anything that happens to be with your immigration status, but it is not a path towards immigration. Individuals still have to follow all of their immigration paperwork as it's stated by country. So these are two different processes that needs to be very clear. But again, the benefits: a social security number, an opportunity for a work permit, and in many states the opportunity for a driver's license as well. So what does that mean in a college admissions process? Well, when it comes to college admissions, we really aren't looking at residency when it comes to a student being documented or undocumented. When it comes to admission, that's a really hard concept to grasp for a student who's been told not to tell their status. So that's something that we hope that students slowly start grasping, because there's a huge campaign called Undocumented and Unafraid. That campaign is to tell students about the fact that they can share their story, share the fact that they're undocumented, and the repercussions aren't going to be negative, specifically in the admissions process. Many students will tell us in their applications that they've had a really hard life or circumstances were really difficult, but they don't really say clearly, I am an undocumented student living in the United States. Here's what that means to me. And so in the admissions process, we can't infer. We can't say, oh, well, I think this means that. We can't read between the lines. And so oftentimes students miss the opportunity for us to really understand their story. But all college applications happen to ask for a social security number in the United States. The reason for that, well, we often line it up with the FAFSA, that free application for federal student aid, so that if we award admission to a student, then that student can also receive financial aid. Well, students have often found it really, really scary to skip that question if they didn't have a social security number, or they also found the country of citizenship question really daunting as well. Well, I'm technically a citizen of Vietnam, or I'm technically a citizen of El Salvador, or I'm technically a citizen of Colombia, but I reside here, I've been here for the last 10 years in the United States, or specifically, let's say, California, so I don't really know that country. I don't really feel like that's my home, or gosh, in some instances, students tell me that they don't even know that home language because they've been here since infants. So when it came to questions like country of citizenship, they often felt torn. What do I put? There's a popular saying in Spanish, ni de aquí, ni de allá, which means I'm not from here, nor am I from there. And that was one of the things that I heard over and over again from students that I had been working with who self-identified as undocumented. Same concept with residency questions. I know that there are a few states that happen to have some in-state tuition waivers or fee reductions for residents, and AB 540, and I'll talk about what that means in a minute, AB 540, eligible students in California get a residency tuition as a California student. Well, okay, great. How do I get that? How do I self-identify without actually identifying? So many students found themselves in a quandary when filling out college admissions applications. Here's what I tell students. Don't lie. Don't ever, ever, ever lie on a college application. The worst thing that can happen is that you lie to us, and then when we catch you in that lie, you're finding yourself out of an offer of admission in the summer, or even when you enroll on campus. If we find out that you lied during move-in weekend, we'll terminate your application, and that's just a really harsh reality for any student. So it's important that when you're filling out application, you're as honest as possible. So what I tell students when it comes to the University of California process is that we do ask that if you've got a DACA social, you enter the social security number where it says, what is your social security? Now, that's a new process for us at the University of California campus this year. We used to tell students not to fill it out, to leave it blank. So every year, things change, and it's really important for students as they're filling out their application to realize that these changes are happening and to not guess or assume. So if my cousin last year did it this way, that's great. That was last year. Make sure that you're asking, how does it work this year? And this year, for the class of 2015, the University of California is asking for social security numbers. Now, does that mean that I can file a federal financial aid form? Nope, not at all. We'll talk about what forms you do fill out in a minute. When it comes to country of citizenship, many of us have realized that there are undocumented students, that there are students who really aren't from here or there, as they say. So it's important that the students realize that there are often opportunities for a student to sort of pass on this question. And I'll give you an example. For the University of California, under country of citizenship, we've created a drop-down menu item that says no selection. So our students who are undocumented can actually mark no selection, and that remains a great option for these students so that they don't have to, again, they do not have to lie, and they're able to identify themselves as undocumented. I've heard that many students feel really scared about sharing their story. It's a fear that we're an official agency. We're, for us in the University of California system, for example, we're a public university, so we're tied to public funds. We're tied to, a government, quote unquote, a government agency. Well, yes, I guess we are, but when it comes to our application process, we don't work on an idea that we're here to catch you in your undocumented status and to report you to ICE or to report you to any federal agency. Instead, we really are looking at the admissions process, trying to figure out who you are, what you've done, and how you're going to contribute to the diversity of our campus. And so many of us have essays or personal statements that ask point blank, who are you? Or what's your life like? And these are great areas for students to self-identify themselves as undocumented. We're not here to judge a student in their actions. I'm not ever going to read an application going, gosh, I really wish that student had, filled out their immigration paperwork. How dare they? No. Let me stop right there. That's never going to happen. One, for the simple fact that it's not my job to do that, but two, I actually come from an immigrant household. My mother came here, and I know she worked really, really hard. Now, granted, she was able to get residency, so she was a lucky individual, but in what particular realm am I not, or there's nothing to say that I would not have been in that same student's shoes. Just small little changes in circumstances, and I could have been the same student. So in the admissions process, we love to put ourselves in the student's shoes to sort of grasp what they're going through. And the only way that I know an undocumented student is having any issues is when they explain it to us. So it's very, very important for students to, quote unquote, out themselves, to be very clear. And just saying I'm undocumented is not enough, but playing the context of that particular situation. Is it that as an undocumented student you have had to help your parents work? I know this is very common for my students who come from Asia, talking about living with cousins or uncles. In a one bedroom with your whole family. For my students from Latin America, Central America, talking about the farm working experience and working in the fields because that's where their parents can work, and having to get up at 5 a.m. to be out in the job site. That's what I've heard over and over again from many of my students, and that's a really strange example, but it's what I want every student to tell me, because I'm not a magician and I can't look into my crystal ball and figure out exactly what their life is like. That in and of itself, being college eligible, even having to go through all of these hardships, the fear of talking to your friends about your immigration status is just huge. The fact that you can't be honest with your best friend because you don't know how they're going to take it, that's the type of information that we love to hear about because it sets the context for us. And we either want it in the personal statement or an essay, or we want it in an interview. Again, interviews, we do have some colleges or universities that conduct interviews. And those colleges and universities that conduct interviews, the first question you can ask is this confidential? And if the student is hearing a response that, yes, what you're saying is going to be kept in the Office of Admissions, or yes, it will be kept in the university, then that's a great segue to, okay, then I need to explain my circumstances. As an undocumented student, I have had to blah, 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 blah. In the admissions process, that is huge. Oops, I skipped a slide. There we go. Now, for just clarity, I do want to point out that many of us have mission statements in the Office of Admissions that talks about diversity, that talks about equality, that talks about respect of culture. And those are actually 3 different phrases that I pulled out of my mission statement in the University of California. And so it's really important that that type of information get into the student's head. You know, we really do look at these circumstances as an opportunity for richness and diversity in the classroom conversation, because I don't want every student to be the exact same type of student. I want the opportunity for the conversation to change. And so oftentimes these types of conversations from a student who is undocumented, where you know the idea that I can't go and do an education abroad program, or I can't go and do a research program because I don't have a work permit, because I'm not DACA eligible, that changes the opportunity in the conversation within a college campus. So of course I'm going to look for it and I'm going to reward it when I can. Now on that particular note, I need to be very clear. Just because a student is undocumented doesn't mean that I'm going to automatically admit them in the admissions process. No, 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 no. I don't do that for anybody, actually. But it gives me a better context of the student's accomplishments. If a student is eligible and they're able to be in the classroom through their own merit, then of course, I will find them a space for me on my campus for them. If a student does receive admission and they find themselves on a college or university campus, it's really important to realize that every academic service is available to that student. I've heard from my students over the years, oh, well, I didn't know I could use a tutoring program, or I didn't know that I was allowed to talk to the advisor. The reason that my grades fell were blah, 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 and it had a lot to do with their undocumented student status. You know, I ended up having my immigration meeting on and down in blah 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 city, and I had to ditch class, so the teacher gave me a C. Okay, well, that's all information that needs to be shared. And so it's really important for students to realize that there are allies and there are support services on campuses. And I can speak specifically about the University of California, and I'll give you a great example. So as you may or may not know, the president for the University of California happens to be Janet Napolitano. Yep, the same person who used to head up Homeland Security and who was a driving force behind DACA. So this particular president decided when she started meeting with students to make undocumented students a public conversation piece. And so she allocated $3 million across the 9 undergraduate UC campuses, and every campus has slowly but surely over the course of the last year created an opportunity for student service coordination. At Santa Barbara, we actually have an undocumented student services coordinator, and we also have what we call a Dream Scholars resource team. Now, we use the word Dream Scholar because we think of the Federal Dream Act and we think of scholar, and we sort of merge the two together. Scholar being a great student, dream being the opportunity for that future laws and immigration to really come into play. So on our campus, we have designated Dream Scholar as an option for students to self-identify and not have a negative connotation on their immigration status. So what's really intriguing is that our Dream Scholars resource team has about 20 people on it, including orientation, academic advisors, Office of Admission, financial aid, the registrar's office, all of these people who go, well, of course I'm going to work with this student. They're one of our students. Irregardless of where they come from or irregardless of where they go to during breaks, they're our students. And that's the key point to make today. It doesn't matter where the student's coming from, if they're receiving financial aid, if they're not receiving financial aid, if they're international, if they're undocumented, they are able to receive all the services for academic advising. Now, when it comes to advising, this is one of the biggest things that students need to realize. In order to keep them on track to graduate on time and save money, they need to talk to advisors every quarter, every semester, whatever term they're on. And they need to be able to talk about all of these particular hurdles that are in their way. Support services oftentimes are also paired with school groups. So on different college campuses, these are some examples of peer support programs. For example, on UCSB, UCLA, and a few other UC campuses, we have an ideas group, which is improving dreams, equality, access, and success. So these are students who are sometimes undocumented, but not always, that are there to help lend support. Maybe it's, hey, I've got an extra room in my apartment. I know you're having trouble with paying for your housing. Come live with me. Maybe it's just, okay, I understand what you're going through. Your parents are working 4 jobs, so did mine. Or maybe it's as simple as, hey, I just need to be able to say my story of that I came here when I was in 3rd grade. I speak 4 languages. I'm the valedictorian of my high school, and the only thing anyone ever talks about is that I'm undocumented. I've heard all of those stories, by the way. They're all real stories. So these are great support services, a few of them within California, RISE, ALAS. There are definitely more across the U.S. as you look at different states. EOP, Educational Opportunity Program, is also a great resource. All UC campuses and most community colleges have an EOP or an EOPS program, and that's a great cultural advising. It's also a great ear, since many of these particular advisors happen to be very, very well aware of undocumented students and the resources on their campuses. As I said, at UCSB, we call ours our Dream Scholars resource team, or a Dreamers Network. Counseling services, it's really important for undocumented students to talk with someone about all the stresses that they go through. I've heard time and time again that students feel all of these pressures at home to be successful, and then they come onto a college campus and they have the same pressures that any other first year, second year, third year student has on top of their home stresses. So having someone, an outlet to talk to, is really, really important. Now, I do want to point out, and I've said this before, that some states have an in-state tuition option, and here are the states on the left-hand side that have that opportunity for undocumented students. In California, we call it AB 540. Assembly Bill 540 allows students who've met X, Y, and Z criteria to have in-state tuition. So X is 3 years in a California high school, Y is that they're graduating from a California high school, and Z is that they're enrolling in a public institution in California. So graduating from a California high school, 3 or more years in a California high school, and enrolling in a public California college or university. These students, on the whole, aren't all undocumented. An example, I graduated from Santa Barbara High School. I moved to New York and I went to grad school. I became a citizen, or I'm sorry, a resident of New York. I've been living there for the last 5 years, and now I want to come back to California to go to graduate school and get my PhD. Well, I technically am an AB 540 eligible student. I'm now eligible to be charged in-state tuition. I'm eligible to request state funds, so that could mean Cal Grants, it could mean funds from the university itself. So just because we hear these terms AB 540, or just because we hear in-state tuition, note that it's not specific legislation for undocumented students. The loophole is that undocumented students fit into this particular law, and as such they reap some of those benefits. Now, this particular law has no ties to financial aid whatsoever. It's just an in-state tuition cost. On my campus, I have some amazing students who work on information generation and also information dissemination about laws, policies. I actually have about 40 students who are part of my ideas group at UCSB. Look how pretty they are! Many of these students have graduated last year that are in the picture. They're off in graduate school. I can tell you that one person in this picture was the valedictorian of their high school with a 4.8 GPA. They're a mechanical engineer on my UCSB campus, which is one of my most selective programs at UCSB. So when we talk about the profile of who is an undocumented student, we're not talking about a student who's getting by. We're talking about some exceptionally, amazingly talented students. As I said, many of them have personal pressures at home. Many of them have deportation of their parents, of their grandparents, of their siblings. So they may be in a comfortable position on a college campus, or they may be in a position where they're a great student, but they have so many different mental stresses. They have anxieties that are just not common. Another thing to realize if that you work with undocumented students is that oftentimes we talk about the ability for them to pay for college. Well, who realistically works 20 to 30 hours a week and pays for their college tuition? Not a lot of people. The cost of college has gone dramatically up, and as such, most students are taking out loans or they're getting scholarships and they're also working. An example is UC Santa Barbara costs $34,000 a year. That's housing, books, tuition, supplies. So it's expensive. And the students who are receiving DACA, who are eligible for DACA, can have a job that pays $10 an hour. Well, that's great. That's not going to pay $34,000 worth of fees. If I'm not DACA eligible, if I didn't file the paperwork, I now have to come up with that money on my own. So it's really important to see all of these personal deterrents are there. It's not an easy thing to be an undocumented student on any college campus. And I always applaud these students for the tenacity that they have to be on a college campus. They earn their own way in through the admissions process, and now they're ready to challenge and change the world. We just need to help. Now, there are lots of policy changes that have happened in the last week. There are some great resources on your screen if you're looking for things on AB 540 because you work with California students. AB540.com is a great resource. If you're looking on the new changes for DACA and all the paperwork process as well as the forms to fill out, you'll find that immigration website, us-immigration.com/deferred/action/application. There are a few immigration law centers that are national centers. These are websites that I've bookmarked because I often go to them to see what new policy changes or support programs are going on. And then if you're looking at the University of California, we've created an undocumented student resource page that actually lists financial aid contacts, admissions contacts, campus contacts for all 9 UC campuses. That's the last link there for you. Questions?
Great, thanks, Cuca. So, all right, everyone, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them into GoToWebinar right now, and we will ask as many as we have time for. So, first off, Cuca, we had a question about specific to a high school counselor. How do you recommend that they connect with and kind of address issues with the undocumented student and their family? Is there an ideal way to reach out and kind of let them know these resources are available, or how do they even start that conversation?
Okay, that's a great question. So how does a counselor start working with students? There are a few different networks depending on what part of the country and where in a state you might be, but I will give you an example. In Santa Barbara County, there are 2 different organizations that work together to do an AB 540 college night. So every high school has a representative, and that representative invites their student body to a college night. And then, the UC campuses, community college campuses, a local financial aid organization, we come together with those counselors and we talk about the hot button items. And so we do this on a yearly basis. We're actually doing our 9th year of AB 540 College Night. So as a high school counselor, note that you really do want to partner with your local college or university and invite them to come in and do a night at your high school so that you don't have to be the expert. I think the hardest thing for a high school counselor is having another set of rules and regulations to memorize. So don't feel that you have to. Instead, note your resources on a college campus and then connect us with your students so that we can be the ones giving them the information and you can be the one that has the opportunity to sort of listen in on that conversation, but again, not have to do all the advising.
Great, thank you. Now I know most of your experiences with the UC, the California state system, but just generally speaking, how do you see financial aid and scholarships and opportunities existing for undocumented students from private colleges and universities versus public systems?
Oh, great question. So one of the things that I've learned talking to colleagues across the United States is that there are many private colleges or universities that have the option to give scholarships to students irregardless of their immigration status. And so it's actually sometimes more cost effective to start with a private school than it is to start with the public school that's outside of your area. Because if I'm moving to a public school 4 hours away, I now have to pay for housing. I do have to pay for all these extra things, whereas a private university can often accommodate financial aid for that particular student. When it comes to California, for example, our financial aid is triggered through what's called the California Dream Act application. So instead of the FAFSA, our students in California file that particular form. That form has the exact same questions as the FAFSA, it's just they're laid out differently and a Social Security is not required. And so that's what California public and, yes, it's like public schools will use when they're awarding any eligible financial aid to an undocumented student. Some students who are looking at private schools might be asked to file the CSS profile, but they might be asked to file it directly with the school in a paper format versus the electronic format. So note that that's a conversation that each college or university will do in their own way based off of the systems that they have. So it's really important to keep the contacts on your college campuses so that you can find what their process happens to be.
Thank you. I know you touched on this earlier, but a question about an undocumented student essentially outing themselves or using their undocumented, their kind of life story as part of either their personal statement or the additional information section on the application. Is that something that you would recommend kind of across all college applications? It's something that's perfectly fine to do and often advantageous in terms of telling about who they are and telling their own personal story?
Definitely. It's a really hard thing to do to explain your life to someone, and specifically when you don't think that it's unique. And I talk to any 17-year-old, they don't understand what's unique about them. It's a really hard thing to talk about. And then add on top of that the fact that you might be undocumented. Well, that's a hard conversation to have. And if you're in a household where your parents have told you, you know what, let's not share that information that stays in the household, they often feel that they should not put it on a college application. Well, I'll reiterate, we are here to admit students. We are not immigration. So we are not here to say, oh, this student isn't here lawfully, let's do something about it. We will never have that conversation, I know, on any of the UC campuses. And as I talk to colleagues in other systems, I hear the exact same comments being made. Instead, our main goal is to figure out who is the student, what is the context of their accomplishments. So what was available to them, what did they take advantage of? And oftentimes an undocumented student might have a lot of things around them, but in reality they can't take advantage of them. And I'll give an example. I was working with a student last year who had this opportunity to do an internship. They filled out the paperwork. They were selected as one of 5 students in their state to be in this particular internship. They were really excited, and when they asked their parents for their social security number, their parents then told them, oh, well, you don't have one, you're not here legally, you're undocumented. And when the student here heard, I'm not here legally, from their parents, big stressor, they thought, oh my God, I'm illegal. And I hate that word, illegal. I really do. Um, that student didn't do anything wrong. They themselves had grown up here. They were really, they thought of themselves as an American because they are. They've lived in America for 16 and a half years. This was a 17-year-old, by the way. And so they knew nothing else. And so they were as American as the person next door. And the difference is they just got all of these opportunities shut on them. That context, down to the point of when I learned that I didn't have a legal right to X, Y, and Z opportunity, that is huge in the college admissions process, because it not only explains why a student did something, but it also explains why they did not do something. And oftentimes we're trying to figure out what the student had available to them, and we will always look at what the student shares in the application first and foremost. And for public schools, that's all we look at. Public schools don't go into interviews. And so if a student doesn't self-disclose their immigration status, they lose a chance for us to get a clear picture of themselves.
Great. Thanks so much, Cuca. That's very helpful. Well, that's it for questions, everyone. We really appreciate your time, and Cuca, really appreciate this presentation. We will have this recorded and we'll send out to all attendees. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can check out the presentation and let us know. So everyone have a great night. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And Cuca, any parting words?
The last thing I would say to any college counselor out there is that if you've got a student who might or might not be, you're not quite sure about their status, if you feel comfortable talking to them, please do so. Reach out. Know that oftentimes they're really scared about coming out about their status, and if they're in any way, shape, or form looking at a college or university, I'd say have them link up with us in the college admissions process. We want to be a resource as much as you're a resource to that student, and if their dream is college, we want to keep that dream alive.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cuca. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.